I was born in Poland in a very bad time, 1936. I was born Jewish, so I had very little chance to survive. However, I survived until 1944, summer of 44, when fortunately the Russians came in to eastern part of Poland. I lived under so-called Russian occupation for about half a year while war was still going on and people were being killed by tens of hundreds of thousands, and I didn't know about it. For me, the war ended by the end of July 1944, when the first Russian came to the place where we were hiding, and he said, "Здравствуйте." And ever since I started to speak Russian, because there were so many of them in Poland, and we lived in a little town, Dobre, east of Warsaw. The front was on the river Vistula. Warsaw was still in the German hands, but we were on the Russian side, and the Russian soldiers stationed in that little town. Some Soviet officers stayed in our apartment and in the neighboring apartments because that was a house, or actually 2 or 3 houses, where some Jewish survivors returned after the war, and guess what? The Russians felt safer with the Jews in those houses than they would feel among Poles, mostly nationalists and not always friendly, and sometimes unfriendly. So we spoke Russian. I spoke Russian. Another Jewish kid who survived from that little town also started to speak Russian. And ever since I have неплохое русское произношение. How I managed to survive, that would be a too long story. I have written about it in some of these books behind me. One of them is called, in translation, The Jewish War, and the other is called The Victory. The victory starts with the moment the Russians come in. I survived in hiding and then passing as a non-Jew in Warsaw and in the provinces where my mother, double illegal as a Jewess and illegal as a teacher of Polish to the Polish kids, managed to save me. Nobody else survived of our entire family. And when we returned to my mother's hometown, Dobre, it turned out that about a dozen people survived out of perhaps 500 Jewish inhabitants. So this is a different story. I also survived communist schooling in post-war Poland until 1967, until the Arab-Israeli conflict, after which the Polish authorities started to persecute Jews inside Poland, accusing them of being Zionists and so on. First of all, I also began to be a writer, writing in Polish and on Jewish topics. So in 1967 I realized I wouldn't be able to continue my writing in Poland, so I defected to the United States. I was part of a theater group which came by the end of 1967 to New York. I finished all my performances, all my duties, and when they were returning to Poland, I turned the other way and announced that I am staying in the United States. And ever since, I am an American. Russian was one of the few high grades that I got on my graduation diploma in Poland. because Russian teachers liked me too. So when I came to California in 1967, by then, for a while I tried to live as a freelance. It wasn't sufficient, so I enrolled at the University of California in Los Angeles, the Slavic department, and I studied Slavic languages and literatures, but mainly it was Russian language and Russian literature. And after that, I even became an associate in Russian literature. And I should have stayed at the university, but I received from Washington an offer I couldn't refuse from U.S. Information Agency. First, they needed me in a Polish for a magazine they produced in Polish called America. It also appeared in Russian America. We had neighbors in the same building from the Russian language department. I made friends with them right away because of our common language. And then when that magazine became reduced from a monthly to a bi-monthly, I was offered a job with the Voice of America. First Polish service for several years, and then for current affairs division in English mainly. On the Polish air, I appeared as Robert Miller, almost like that investigator, because I didn't want to give my own name as a known writer in Poland, Henryk Grynberg. And besides, we had a policy that we were not allowed to express our own opinions, only quote opinions of other people. So, as a Robert Miller, I could quote Henryk Grynberg, and I did it quite often. Which helped a little bit my publicity in Poland. I took an early retirement because I had a foreign service status, which allowed me to retire at the age 55 after 20 years of service. I took the early opportunity in order to become an independent, self-employed writer. And ever since, besides, in Poland, everything changed suddenly, overnight. They started to republish my books in Poland. I would travel to Poland, and it was a strange phenomenon. I didn't return to Poland in person, but I returned as a writer, and I stayed in America as a refugee from Poland. And I stress the fact that I never stopped to be a refugee. Whenever I don't like what the government is doing in Warsaw, I say, I am glad that I am a refugee. I don't stop being such. I am worried that apparently humanity doesn't learn from its own experience. They are repeating their old mistakes. For instance, now there's a trend, even in America, socialism. Socialism, which I have seen, which I have lived throughout my most formative years. I was 31 when I left socialism. And these young people at the universities, in campuses, they think that it's a great thing because they wouldn't need to pay off their loans. And their professors think socialism is a great thing because ideological competition is much easier than scholarly competition, you know. So I am afraid that I wrote a post that there is a real threat of socialism. This is not only in America, also in some other Western countries. Fortunately, the former socialist countries know better, and perhaps they are not going to repeat the same mistake. The other thing which worries me very much is anti-Semitism, which is spreading, well, was spreading initially under the cover of anti-Zionism. Anti-Zionism was invented by the communists in order not to show that they were anti-Semites, and somehow it became transplanted to the West as such. To make things worse, so many years after the Holocaust, people start speaking openly about hating the Jews again, forgetting that words lead to murder quite often, especially in the case of Jews. The future looks very iffy from my point of view. I know that such a miracle as freedom and democracy, this miracle is relatively historically new. Ancient Greece doesn't count because that wasn't really a democracy. It was a democracy of the elite and not of the slaves. The real democracy is only a couple of hundred years old, and the only guarantee of the existence of this democracy and freedom is America, nobody else. And America has a competition, a very strong competition. It's not only Russia now, it's China. China, which is able, dagnati piregnati Ameriku, as it was the slogan in the Soviet Union. It is, because it has so many people, so skilled people, people who work hard, and they have tremendous achievements. They are a genuine superpower, and if America doesn't survive as a democratic country, but a socialist country, for God's sakes, the economy will go down, it will not be a superpower anymore, and there will be no freedom and no democracy. This is what worries me. Don't take it for granted. It's not an old phenomenon, and it may disappear, and who knows, it will ever reappear again. The Russian culture is great, except what Russia lacks is democracy, which they have deserved after so many years of Soviet of the unfortunate Soviet system. They had a chance. I'm not saying they have lost it. It's still there, and one day they can regain it. I hope they do. I wish them well.